Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you loved unconditionally, someone you believed was pure goodness incarnate, and realized that everything you thought you knew was a perfectly constructed lie? For me, that person was my mother. From the time I was a child, she represented everything gentle and unwavering. She was the cornerstone of our family, the kind of woman who volunteered at the church every week and always had a comforting word for every neighbor. I genuinely believed she was the most devout and sweetest soul alive, utterly incapable of malice or darkness. She was, quite simply, my perfect image of maternal love and unwavering devotion. Then Dad died. It was sudden, an unexpected, brutal silence that swallowed our lives whole. In the immediate aftermath, Mom was heartbroken, withdrawn, which was natural grief. But as weeks turned into months, her mourning morphed into something cold, something unsettling, slowly eroding the perfect image I had cherished. The tranquility that once defined her vanished, replaced by a restless energy she seemed to channel into secret rituals. She started whispering when she thought she was alone, low, urgent tones that sounded like conversation, yet no one was visibly there to receive her words. She began lighting candles, not for ordinary prayer in the living room, but in the dead of night, scattered in strange, shadowed corners of the house. And then there was the basement, always forbidden, a dusty, locked space we never spoke of. It became her sanctuary and, increasingly, my obsession. Now, she spent hours down there, sometimes returning looking pale and drained, sometimes with a strange, almost ecstatic glow. I felt that familiar, gnawing sensation of dread, that cold whisper telling me something was fundamentally wrong with my world. You ever been through this, where the person closest to you starts to feel like a complete stranger? My sense of loss was compounded by a growing paranoia. My mother, the woman everyone admired, was clearly harboring a significant family secret, something deep within the heart of our home. I tried to dismiss it as extreme grief, but the strange rituals kept escalating. What you're about to discover now, about the true nature of her secret and the depths of my father's supposed absence, might just surprise you. I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. The question wasn't just what she was doing, but who she was conversing with in that darkness. My growing need for the truth, fueled by a terrible longing for my father and the unsettling change in my mother, forced my hand. I needed proof. I needed to see behind the closed door of that forbidden space, and the only way to do that was to install a hidden camera. Stay with me until the end, because the footage I uncovered destroyed everything I believed about love and family, forcing me to confront a reality far darker than any nightmare. The agonizing hours that followed the camera installation stretched into an eternity of silent accusation. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a judgment, and every fleeting shadow felt like my mother watching me from the hallway. I was a spy in my own home, driven by a terrible, desperate love for a truth that I suspected would shatter me. The waiting period was far more unbearable than the act of setting up the device. It was the quiet, cold calculation of dread, the realization that I was about to deliberately walk into a storm I might not survive. I felt completely isolated in that moment, shouldering the weight of this secret investigation alone. But perhaps you haven't. Perhaps you've faced a moment of profound doubt or had to fight to uncover a difficult truth in your own life, feeling that chilling need to know what's truly hidden behind the curtain. If this topic resonates with you, if this journey into the shadows of family secrets is striking a chord, leave a comment below. Share your own experience, your opinion, or just tell me how this narrative is making you feel right now. Your participation here is what allows this channel to grow and reach more people who need to hear stories about confronting these hard truths. We are building a community defined by courage and honesty, and your support makes a monumental difference. If you believe this kind of conversation deserves a platform, please hit the like button on this video. And, of course, if you want to stay tuned for the next parts of this journey, because trust me, the footage is just the beginning of the collapse, make sure you subscribe to the channel. With the emotional connection established, I returned to the cold, hard reality of the clock ticking down. I had to wait until they were both definitively out of the house. I had to retrieve the chip and face the digital evidence. I remember the exact tremor in my hand as I finally approached the door again, not to unlock it, but to retrieve the tiny memory card that held the key to my father's disappearance and my mother's terrifying transformation. That small piece of plastic felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I slipped the retrieved chip into the ancient, bulky reader I kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. The data transfer was agonizingly slow, each percentage point ticking by like a minute hand counting down to an unknown detonation. While I waited for the digital contents to materialize on the screen, my mind involuntarily drifted back to the initial shift, the subtle seismic change in the atmosphere of our home that began immediately after the funeral. It wasn't an abrupt breakdown. It was a slow, creeping alteration of the household routine, a psychological shadow lengthening across familiar spaces. My mother, usually a creature of absolute predictability, began to exhibit patterns of intense secrecy. The house, once open and bright, started closing in on itself. The whispers were the first sign, faint and indistinct, always occurring between midnight and dawn. I initially rationalized them as manifestations of profound grief, auditory hallucinations born from overwhelming loss. But they persisted with a mechanical regularity that defied the spontaneity of sorrow. Then came the rituals, incense heavy and cloying. A scent I couldn't identify, certainly not sandalwood or patchouli, would burn in the study for entire afternoons, leaving a residue that stained the walls a faint, sickly yellow. The air itself became thick, saturated with an odor of burnt resin and unspoken intent. The increasing frequency of locked doors soon became a source of true urban tension. Our small, shared apartment in the city had never required barriers. Trust was the foundation upon which our domestic life was built. Now, the study, my father's sanctuary, was perpetually sealed. When I tried to ask her about it, her response was always the same. A vacant look, followed by a strange, non-sequitur comment about needing privacy for her ongoing investigation. It was a word she used frequently now, a sterile term that masked the emotional chaos surrounding us. I started observing her closely, analyzing her micro-expressions, attempting a desperate, amateur psychological profile. Her eyes, which I remembered as warm and direct, had developed a distant, almost predatory glaze. It was as if the person I knew had been replaced by a meticulous, anxious double. She moved through the rooms with a new, unsettling economy of motion, always seeming to listen to something just beyond the range of human hearing. The true mystery wasn't solely my father's disappearance. It was the slow, deliberate disappearance of my mother's former self. I once caught a more substantial fragment of her nocturnal dialogues. It wasn't a prayer or a weeping confession. It was a measured response, delivered in a low, conspiratorial tone, addressing someone who was definitely not physically present in the room. She used phrases that felt coded, references to the geometry and the arrangement. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't merely mourning. She was communicating. The grief was a facade shielding a far more complex, potentially dangerous secret operation. She was actively participating in something that required absolute secrecy and these strange, constant ceremonial acts. The slow, sickening realization of her psychological detachment was interrupted by the sharp, abrupt chime of the computer system. The data transfer was complete. Whatever cryptic conversations she had been having, whatever dark purpose fueled the burning incense and the locked doors, the answer was now staring back at me from the screen, contained within files labeled only with timestamps and cryptic alphanumeric sequences. I leaned forward, the cold glow of the screen reflecting the immediate tension of the moment, ready to dive into the digital evidence that promised to explain the geometry of her madness and the reason behind the profound shift in our household dynamics. The digital residue proved to be a dead end, a meticulously constructed labyrinth of innocuous search queries and benign social media activity designed, perhaps, to ward off casual scrutiny. The geometry of her madness, if it existed at all, was not mapped on a server, but etched into the very foundation of the house. I pushed the laptop away, the cold aluminum momentarily replaced by the heavier, denser reality of the silence that pressed down from the floor above and the muffled activity that resonated from the floor below. The immediate tension was no longer abstract. It was structural. The rules surrounding the basement had been absolute, etched into the domestic code of conduct since I was old enough to walk. It was my father's domain, a place of potential hazards, exposed wiring, heavy machinery, the inevitable entropy of forgotten belongings. He had always maintained that the danger was physical. Rusted nails, splintered wood. My mother merely reinforced the decree, her voice unusually stern whenever the subject arose. Now, the roles were inverted, and the danger felt entirely psychological. The space, once forbidden due to tools, was now forbidden because of her presence. Every night, shortly after midnight, the house seemed to exhale and she would descend. The creak of the third step down the main staircase, the faint metallic click as the lock was engaged, followed by a profound, absorbing quiet. The key, once hanging innocently on a hook near the kitchen, had vanished entirely, reinforcing the palpable sense of exclusion. Standing near the basement door, the air grew thick with a peculiar mixture. It was the heavy, sweet scent of cheap incense, used perhaps to cover or consecrate, overlaying something sharp and unsettling. A metallic tang that smelled faintly of ozone and corrosion, a signature of deep urban tension brought home. I started keeping a vigil, not in front of a screen, but pressed against the door jamb, ears straining for auditory clues. The sounds were elusive, inconsistent with the simple organization of old boxes or the repair of a broken appliance. There was a low, rhythmic vibration that pulsed through the floorboards, sometimes accompanied by a sound like dragging weight, heavy and slow, punctuated by the occasional sharp impact. Not a hammer blow, but something more controlled, almost surgical. This was an investigation driven by pure, localized paranoia. My mother, who spent her days in a state of suspended animation, moved with a terrifying, focused efficiency once she crossed that threshold. The profound shift in her demeanor, the cold precision of her movements below ground, suggested a level of secrecy that transcended simple eccentricity. The weight of the mystery became unbearable. I needed to see the space, to understand what ritual or destructive endeavor required such dedication and secrecy. The barrier of the locked door, the missing key, only amplified the need for penetration. I began to map the surrounding structure, noting the slight gap where the door met the frame near the hinge, calculating the leverage required. If the digital world offered no truth, then the truth had to be forced out of the physical reality, one splintered piece at a time. I moved toward the workshop shed outside, needing something less subtle than a bobby pin, something designed for brute, calculated interference. The necessity of breaching the physical barrier was born not from casual curiosity, but from a profound, chilling dissonance radiating from the person I trusted most. My father's vanishing act had left an empty chair, yet the real void was the one my mother had meticulously constructed around herself. For weeks, I had meticulously observed the architecture of her grief, and it was structurally unsound. It wasn't the raw, messy collapse of sorrow I expected. It was a calculated retreat, a careful sealing off of emotion. Her eyes, once open and direct, now carried the heavy, veiled look of someone concealing a critical piece of evidence. I had tried every gentle approach, every conversational opening designed to ease her burden, only to be met with that unnerving, artificial smile. It was a performance that failed under scrutiny, a veneer of normalcy stretched taut over an undisclosed secret. This realization, that the last pillar of my immediate family was actively engaged in a deep deception, was the true engine driving my investigation. The fear of losing her, not just to absence but to this psychological shadow, propelled me toward the workshop shed with a focused, almost desperate intent. I needed certainty, and if she wouldn't offer it through words, then the physical reality of the house had to be forced to yield its secrets. The shed swallowed the suburban light, smelling of oil, sawdust, and the metallic ghosts of long-finished projects. I located the heavy, industrial toolbox beneath the workbench. It felt cold and reassuringly solid. My eyes scanned the array of precision instruments, the delicate calipers, the fine-gauge wiring tools, and rejected them instantly. This situation demanded brute force applied with surgical precision. My fingers closed around the handle of a thick, flat pry bar. It was heavy, designed for leverage and the deliberate violation of integrated structures. This tool was not about finesse. It was about unavoidable intrusion. Holding the steel bar, I felt the immediate spike of internal tension. The silence of the night pressed against the corrugated metal walls of the shed, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. I slipped the bar beneath my jacket, the cold pressing against my side, a constant, tangible reminder of the confrontation ahead. My mind was already running tactical simulations, calculating the necessary angle of insertion, the minimum required force to pop the latch without causing undue noise that might draw unwanted attention. A brief moment of necessary urban surveillance. The walk back across the short stretch of lawn felt like traversing a perimeter fence. Every shadow seemed poised to shift, every distant siren a potential witness. I moved low, utilizing the scant cover provided by the overgrown hedges, approaching the rear entrance with the focused determination of someone executing a critical breach. The door, previously just a mundane portal, now represented the threshold of the unknown, the final, desperate barrier between my mother's carefully guarded psychological fortress and the truth I needed to expose. I paused at the threshold, the pry bar now in hand, the cool metal catching the faint ambient light. I had mapped the structural weakness. Now it was time for the practical application of that knowledge, to make a calculated disruption in the silent, terrifying anomaly that had taken root in our home. I positioned the tip of the steel bar against the precise point of weakness I had identified earlier, ready to apply the necessary pressure. I applied leverage to the pry bar. The metal bit deep into the compromised wood, and the resulting groan of the stressed frame was immediate and deafening. It was a profound, resonant sound that instantly betrayed the violation of the house's silence, a noise that would carry through the ventilation shafts and under the floorboards. The realization hit with the force of an electric shock. This calculated disruption was fundamentally flawed. Brute force was incompatible with the required stealth. If I continued, the structural damage would be evident, creating an immediate, explosive confrontation rather than yielding the controlled, investigative information I sought. I retracted the steel bar, the metallic click sounding like a sharp, definitive punctuation mark in the oppressive stillness. The physical approach was abandoned. The risk of detection and the subsequent psychological fallout were too great. I needed eyes where I could not risk placing my body. The strategy shifted immediately to passive surveillance, a necessary retreat into the realm of hidden observation. The camera itself was a minuscule device, barely larger than a thumb joint, easily concealed within the shadow cast by the door frame molding, aimed precisely at the lower latch of the basement door. The installation demanded focused, minute movements, executed under the harsh, clinical glare of the utility corridor light. The following hours were a grueling study in protracted vigilance. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift of the building settling into the colder temperatures of the late night, was interpreted by my heightened state of urban tension as a prelude to movement. The distant, low hum of the city's electrical grid and the occasional lonely siren only emphasized the isolated dread contained within the walls of the house. I set the notification sensitivity to its lowest threshold, ensuring it would only trigger on substantial movement directly in front of the lens. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:15 a.m., just as the residual anxiety was beginning to lull my exhausted system toward a dangerous, shallow sleep. The phone vibrated once, a sharp, insistent buzz against the wood of the table. The screen lit up instantly, motion detected, basement corridor. The timestamp confirmed the exact moment of the intrusion, 3:16 a.m. This sudden, confirmed breach of the night shattered the fragile calm I had managed to construct. My heart rate immediately spiked, a raw, physiological reaction that bypassed rational thought. I moved with the studied, slow precision of someone handling volatile material. I unlocked the screen, the blue light illuminating the tight knot of anticipation in my face, and located the recording file. The silence in the room was now absolute, waiting for the playback to expose the terrifying anomaly. I tapped play. The first few seconds showed only the static, undisturbed view of the corridor, a still life of domestic normalcy overlaid with dread. Then the sound began, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic scrape, followed by the slow, deliberate turning of the deadbolt. The door, which had been a static, impenetrable barrier for weeks, began to open inward. The camera angle was perfect, capturing the figure as she emerged. She moved with an unnerving economy of motion, her posture rigid, almost mechanical. Her eyes, wide and fixed, did not seem to register the immediate environment. There was no hesitation, no glance backward into the darkness she left behind. It was a purely functional, compelled exit, suggesting a deep internal programming overriding conscious awareness. She was carrying something. It was obscured initially by the angle of her body, but as she pivoted toward the main hall, the object came into clearer view. A small, tightly bound bundle, wrapped in what appeared to be dark, heavy cloth. The way she cradled it suggested either substantial weight or extreme fragility, held close to her chest. The tension in her shoulders was palpable, a physical manifestation of some deep, internal compulsion driving her actions. She didn't look up, didn't make a sound, simply proceeding down the corridor toward the living area, disappearing out of the camera's narrow field of view. The timestamp continued to advance, showing the empty corridor again. I immediately rewound the footage, zeroing in on the moment she secured the door again. The click of the lock, a definitive punctuation mark on the clandestine activity. The undeniable visual evidence demanded a new phase of observation, requiring me to leave the passive security of the bedroom and engage directly with the unfolding nocturnal movement. Where was she taking that bundle in the dead of the night, and what exactly did that cloth conceal? I need to know what you think about the psychological aspect of this compelled movement. Let me know your theories about the bundle in the comments below. The undeniable visual evidence demanded a new phase of observation, requiring me to leave the passive security of the bedroom and engage directly with the unfolding nocturnal movement. I returned to the digital archive, slowing the playback of the newly installed basement camera to isolate the exact moment of her descent. The acoustics, surprisingly sharp in the cramped, damp space, provided a chilling counterpoint to the grainy visuals. She materialized at the foot of the concrete stairs, not with the hurried anxiety of someone hiding a misdeed, but with the methodical pace of an automaton. In her hands, she carried the box, a heavy, rectangular container I hadn't seen before, reflecting the single, struggling bulb with a dull, metallic sheen. It was too sturdy for simple storage, suggesting contents of significant weight or value. The air of urban tension thickened as she moved toward the far corner, a space previously indistinguishable from shadow, now revealed as the location of the immobile mass. She knelt, placing the box carefully on the floor. The object she faced was formidable, a large, dark presence that defied immediate identification. It was certainly solid, casting a deep, absolute shadow that seemed to absorb the meager light. It exerted a palpable psychological pressure on the frame, an anchor point in the subterranean environment. What followed was the most disturbing segment of the entire surveillance operation. She began to speak, but the tone was utterly devoid of the expected grief or panic. It was a low, even murmur, almost conversational, yet punctuated by phrases that sounded rehearsed, coded. This vocal dissonance with the established narrative of loss suggested she was not venting sorrow, but executing a prescribed step in a complicated process. She was communicating, but not necessarily with a person. I amplified the audio, straining to catch the exact words, but they remained just below the threshold of clarity, a stream of quiet insistence. Then the response. It was not auditory. It was physical. The vast shadow before her shifted, not dramatically, but a profound, slow adjustment, like a massive weight settling deeper into the earth. It was a movement too sluggish, too heavy, to be attributed to human interaction. The slight tremor registered on the concrete floor, subtle enough to be dismissed as a camera wobble, but too precise in its timing. It was a confirmation of presence, a silent acknowledgement of her words. The implication of this interaction was devastating. She was performing a ritualistic exchange under some form of profound coercion, delivering the contents of the box to something that responded with geological slowness. The entire scene suggested a clandestine operation, an investigation into a personal, deeply ingrained mystery that had moved far beyond simple mourning into the realm of structured, unsettling duty. The forensic analysis of this silent exchange demanded immediate attention. The box was opened, its contents obscured by her body, but the faint click of metal on metal suggested the transfer of something small, yet vital. The dialogue continued for several minutes, a one-sided conversation with an entity that communicated only through gravitational adjustments. The moment she stood up, the shadow seemed to deepen, the interaction complete. She did not look back, ascending the stairs with the same unnatural composure, leaving the empty box behind. The crucial piece of the puzzle lay not in her actions, but in the silence that followed the shadow's response, leaving the overwhelming implication that this was merely the prelude to a much darker agreement. What compels a person to maintain such a cold demeanor while engaging in this type of subterranean communication? I need to know your take on the psychological framework that allows for this level of detachment. Leave your theories below. The smile was the most unsettling part. It wasn't triumphant or malicious. It was simply serene, the kind of expression reserved for quiet acceptance of a deeply held truth. My mind immediately fractured the reality I knew. The groceries she had just set down, the loaf of bread, the carton of milk, sat incongruously next to the revelation of a subterranean, years-long anomaly. I didn't move. I couldn't process the sheer weight of her statement against the backdrop of her casual demeanor. This wasn't a confession born of guilt. It was a statement of fact delivered by someone suffering a profound break from shared reality, or perhaps someone who had simply constructed a horrifyingly stable alternate one. The question wasn't if she believed it, but how she maintained such psychological composure while harboring such a secret. What do you mean, he lives down here? I managed, my voice thin, strained by the effort of maintaining a neutral tone. I needed details, something tangible to anchor the investigation before I succumbed to complete disbelief. I watched her eyes, searching for the telltale flicker of deception or the glaze of delusion, but found only a disconcerting clarity. She began unpacking the bags, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman whose routine was sacred, unaffected by the monstrous narrative she had just delivered. She placed the apples in the fruit bowl, her movements slow and deliberate, before she finally spoke again, her voice soft, almost maternal. She explained, without prompting, that he needed silence now, that the light hurt his eyes, and that the concrete steps were too much for him. This wasn't the story of a ghost or a symbolic presence. This was the description of a dependent, living entity, a prisoner or perhaps a willing recluse. She spoke of his needs as if they were mundane household chores, like rotating the laundry or paying the electric bill. The urban tension of our quiet suburban existence suddenly snapped, revealing a deeply concealed domestic horror. I realized the constant, low-level thrumming I had attributed to pipes or distant traffic was likely just the rhythm of her life adjusting to this unbelievable situation. I knew then that I couldn't allow this narrative to stand unchallenged. The need for forensics, the cold, hard proof, became an overwhelming imperative. I stepped toward the kitchen door, the one that led directly to the concrete steps descending into the darkness. She didn't try to stop me. That was the most terrifying sign. Her lack of resistance suggested either absolute confidence in her secret's impenetrability or a desire for me to finally witness the core of her paranoia. I looked at her one last time before reaching the door. She was simply putting away the milk, her back to me, the picture of domestic tranquility, utterly unconcerned with the seismic shift that was about to occur. The silence between us was heavy, charged with years of unspoken complicity and denial. As my hand gripped the cold metal knob, I felt a wave of profound dread, realizing that the truth I was about to uncover might be fundamentally destructive, regardless of whether it was based on delusion or reality. If he was truly down there, the implications for her mental state and potential criminality were staggering. If he wasn't, the depth of her cognitive dissonance meant I was dealing with a psychological landscape far more treacherous than any physical threat. The lock was stiff, yielding slowly with a grating sound that seemed deafening in the sudden silence. The air that wafted up was thick, cold, and carried a faint, metallic scent that instantly raised every alarm bell in my system. It wasn't the dust of an unused space. It was something else, something heavier, older, and deeply disturbing. The smell of containment and decay. I tightened my grip, preparing to force the door fully open, knowing that whatever lay beyond that threshold would instantly convert this long-running mystery into a cold case demanding immediate intervention, changing the shape of our lives forever. Right below, I'm on this journey too. I'm on this journey too. The anticipated resistance of a locked door never materialized. Instead of the forced entry I had steeled myself for, the heavy wooden slab simply yielded inward, the mechanism offering no click or resistance, only a slow, deliberate scrape against the concrete threshold. It was unlocked, waiting, an immediate shift in the dynamic that replaced brute force with creeping dread. The air pressure difference was palpable, pulling me into the subterranean gloom where the scent of decay was now overlaid by something sharp, metallic, and profoundly unsettling. The residual odor of burnt chemicals and old blood. I descended the steep, rickety steps, careful not to disturb the silence. The single, bare bulb suspended from a frayed wire cast a sickly, yellow light that danced wildly with the slightest disturbance, exaggerating the shadows into grotesque, fleeting figures. This was not the dust-laden, forgotten space of a traditional basement. This environment was actively utilized, a hidden chamber dedicated to a specific, ongoing purpose. My investigative focus sharpened, converting the generalized urban tension of the neighborhood into the immediate personal threat of a contained scene. The floor was concrete, but heavily marred. Deep abrasions scored the surface, long tracks suggesting repeated dragging of heavy, non-wheeled objects. Near a makeshift workbench, cluttered with syringes and rusted clamps, lay coils of thick nylon rope, neatly stacked, suggesting preparation rather than abandonment. However, the true psychological violation was displayed on the far wall. Secured by haphazardly placed tacks was a collage of photographs. Not random faces, but images meticulously selected from my own past. School pictures, faded snapshots from family vacations, moments I hadn't thought about in decades. The sheer intimacy of the surveillance was a chilling testament to the depth of the malice at play. This wasn't coincidence. It was a curated display designed to unnerve, an undeniable proof that the operator of this hidden space knew exactly who I was. In the center of the room, dominating the weak light, was the source of the deepest disquiet. An enormous, irregular mass lay covered by a heavy, olive-green canvas, the material thick and industrial. It absorbed the light, turning the area around it into a pocket of deeper shadow. The shape defied easy categorization. It was too large for a trunk, too asymmetrical for machinery. It sat low, suggesting immense weight or perhaps a deliberate attempt to hide its height. Every fiber of my being screamed anomaly. My movement toward it was involuntary, driven by a morbid, investigative compulsion overriding the survival instinct. I halted inches away, the silence of the basement suddenly deafening. I extended my hand, my fingers brushing the coarse, stiff fabric. It was cold, damp with the subterranean humidity. I pressed slightly, expecting the solid resistance of wood or metal. Instead, there was a momentary, disturbing give, a slight yielding that felt strangely organic. And then the unthinkable. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation transmitted directly through the material to my fingertips. A slow, internal shift, a deliberate contraction and expansion beneath the canvas. A subtle, yet undeniable, heave. My mind raced, grasping for rational explanations. A structural shift, settling debris, anything but the truth. But the reality was visceral and absolute. Something biological was contained directly beneath my hand, breathing, or at least moving, confined within the shroud. The movement ceased instantly, leaving me frozen, locked in a paralyzing grip of terror. The knowledge that I was standing over a living, concealed entity, and that my touch had likely alerted it to my presence, was a psychological anchor sinking deep into panic. I scanned the perimeter again, noticing the melted candles arranged in a crude semicircle near the base of the covered object, suggesting long hours spent in vigil or perhaps some form of dark ritual. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of the secret it held. This was the core of the subterfuge, the hidden engine driving the house's dark history. The need to rip the canvas away and finally expose the truth battled the primal urge to retreat immediately, to escape the confines of this subterranean horror before whatever lay beneath decided to move again. What do you think is breathing under that canvas? Let me know in the comments below. The warmth of her hand, a sensation once synonymous with safety, now registered as a cold, paralyzing weight. It was the anchor of a massive, unspoken lie. The soft, almost hypnotic quality of her voice, whispering words meant for a child, shattered the last vestiges of my rational defense mechanisms. This wasn't the mourning widow I had flown across the country to comfort. This was a willing accomplice, a gatekeeper to a hidden, corrosive truth. The movement beneath the shroud, violent and sudden, punctuated her statement, a heavy, muffled confirmation that whatever lay there was not inert, not a relic, but a captive or perhaps a beneficiary of their shared delusion. I felt a sudden, profound spike of cognitive dissonance, struggling to reconcile the gentle woman who taught me how to tie my shoes with the architect of this subterranean subterfuge. I took a sharp step back, the grinding of my shoe on the damp concrete sounding deafening in the silence that followed the movement. My eyes, wide and fixed on the canvas, darted momentarily to her face. There was no terror, no forced performance of grief, only a placid, terrifying expectation. Her gaze held the opaque quality of someone who had lived too long on the fringes of reality, her personal perimeter defined by the boundaries of this bunker. The air thickened with a palpable dread, the kind that settles in the chest when you realize the person closest to you is operating under an entirely separate set of rules, a clandestine internal logic. The whole scene felt like a meticulously staged piece of surveillance, designed not to protect a secret, but to draw me into it, making me part of the decay. What did he wait for, Mom? My voice was low, strained, stripped of any filial affection. It was the voice of an investigator demanding clarity from a hostile witness. She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, a gesture of profound, unsettling paranoia. For you to finish it, darling, it needs the bloodline complete. The implication landed like a physical blow. This wasn't about inheritance or sentimental objects. It was a ritualistic continuation, a terrible legacy passed down not through wills, but through expectation and silence. The urban tension I'd felt since arriving in this forgotten corner of the city coalesced into a sharp, immediate fear right here, underground, where the city noise couldn't penetrate. I scanned the narrow passage, calculating the distance to the stairs, realizing the exit was obstructed not by bars, but by her unwavering presence and the psychological hold she still attempted to exert. My fingers curled into fists, the cold, damp air stinging my knuckles. She wasn't holding me captive with ropes. She was holding me with the unbreakable, horrifying bond of family obligation twisted into something monstrous. My attention snapped back to the canvas. The fabric didn't just ripple this time. It stretched violently, pulled taut by something attempting to rise or leverage itself against the floor. A low, wet sound, like shifting earth or heavy breathing through thick fluid, emanated from beneath the covering. The scent of ozone mixed acutely with the stale air of the cellar. I understood the truth now, a chilling certainty replacing the nagging suspicion. My father hadn't merely built something here, he had nurtured it. And my mother was its faithful guardian. The years of silence, the isolation, the strange energy surrounding their final days. It was all a preparation. I was the final ingredient, the missing piece in a grotesque, familial puzzle. The thing beneath the canvas strained again, and I saw a definite indentation, the outline of something large and terribly wrong pressing against the heavy material, pushing the boundary between the hidden and the revealed. The movement was slow, deliberate, signaling not distress, but an imminent eruption. The time for deliberation was over. I had to rip the canvas away, expose the core of this nightmare, before it decided to expose itself. Right below, I'm on this journey too. I'm on this journey too. The decision was made, yet the hand froze inches from the rough texture of the canvas. It wasn't the fear of what the thing was, but the sudden, paralyzing realization of what it meant. This wasn't just an object. It was the physical manifestation of years of carefully constructed silence, a monumental lie built right into the foundation of my life. To rip the canvas was to destroy not just the secret, but the last shred of comfortable denial that had allowed me to sleep at night. That momentary hesitation was a silent acknowledgement of the terrible cost of knowing the truth. The tension in that space, the silence between my decision and the action, felt like the most honest conversation I'd ever had with myself. If you felt that same suffocating pressure, that profound sense of shared understanding right there in that moment of absolute stillness, please give this video a like. It's the simplest way to show that we connected over this complex emotion, that we're navigating this unsettling territory together. And if you find value in exploring these deeper, often uncomfortable truths, the things we choose to ignore, the stories bubbling just beneath the surface of the mundane, then consider subscribing to the channel. This isn't just about suspense. It's about dissecting the hidden mechanics of trust and denial. Subscribing ensures that you stay connected to this ongoing exploration and don't miss the moment when that canvas finally comes down. It's how we keep this conversation focused and insightful. This narrative requires patience, a willingness to sit with the discomfort until the very end. If you stuck with me through this entire experience, through the rising dread and the final heavy moment of decision, let me know you were here until the closing thought. Drop a comment below and simply write, "This message was for me." Knowing who is truly invested in this journey makes all the difference. We spend so much time looking outward for threats, for the monsters lurking outside the door, forgetting that sometimes the greatest mysteries, the most unsettling truths, are housed within four walls, often shielded by the people we trust the most. The greatest betrayals are those of omission, the dark spaces left intentionally empty. If you have ever felt that someone in your own house was hiding something you would never fully understand, I want to hear your story. We can't stop here. The canvas is still waiting. There is a video right here that complements this subject and picks up exactly where we left off, detailing the immediate aftermath of this confrontation. Click there and continue this journey with me.